All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the City of Helena Zoning Commission meeting for November 14th. Thanks for being here. I want to reflect for the record that we do have a quorum of 5 commissioners present tonight. So we will start on with our agenda. First up is approval of the minutes from October 10th. Those were linked online, so hopefully everyone had a chance to review the minutes. Are there any edits to the minutes? Okay, there are no edits, therefore the minutes are approved as posted. Thank you, April. Moving on down the agenda to regular items, we have 2 public hearings tonight. Typically, the Zoning Commission will run through an agenda that includes a presentation from staff, an opportunity for the commission to ask questions of staff. We will then open it up for public comment, or in this case, the applicant is the city. Typically, we would have the applicant be allowed to provide some input, and then we will have a discussion, a motion, a vote, and we will move on from there. So we will open it up to city staff. Welcome. Thank you.
Good evening, Chair and Commissioners. Thank you again for your time this evening. We're resuming where we left off pretty much from the last meeting. If you recall, item 1 was on the agenda last time, but I requested that it would be tabled as new feedback from city legal suggested additional changes to city code in order for this Senate Bill 528 implementation to be accurate and fully reflected in the City of Helena code. And so you will see the exact same slides this evening as you have before. It's just now there are 2 different chapters of the zoning code that are being amended. So once again, this is just an act that was passed during the 2023 legislative session that establishes regulations for accessory dwelling units and limits municipalities' ability to regulate accessory dwelling units. We shall adopt regulations under this new Senate Bill 528 to allow a minimum of 1 accessory dwelling unit by right on a lot with a single family dwelling. An accessory dwelling unit may be attached, detached, or internal to the single family dwelling on a parcel lot. If the accessory dwelling unit is detached from or attached to the single family dwelling unit, it may not be more than 75% of the gross floor area of the single family dwelling or 1,000 square feet, whichever is less. The act prohibits restrictive regulations for accessory dwelling units. The Helena City Code restriction that is currently in place that would impact this is the off-street parking requirement. Currently, there would have to be off-street parking available. However, that is limited in Senate Bill 528. So the proposed ordinance would define accessory dwelling units as per the language in Senate Bill 528, and then to add accessory dwelling units to the Chapter 22 off-street parking table, noting that no parking is required, no off-street parking required for accessory dwelling units. And so moving quickly on to our purpose here tonight is a recommendation to the City Commission of an ordinance establishing accessory dwelling unit zoning regulations and eliminating off-street parking requirements for accessory dwelling units by amending Chapter 4 and Chapter 22 of Title 11 of the Helena City Code. Any questions?
I have one procedural question. So on our agenda, these are listed as 2 items, but it sounds like this is combined into 1, or is...
It was originally noticed as 2 items. I was asked to go ahead and bring these together and consolidate them into 1 ordinance. And so it will be just 1 ordinance desired that will amend both Chapter 4 and Chapter 22, just taking the 2 items, combining them, changing the ordinance language.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions for staff?
I have one. So in the regulations before, did the city require off-street parking for ADUs, or was that like a black hole in our code?
An accessory dwelling unit would just fall into a second dwelling unit on the property, and so it would require off-street parking. So in order to allow this no off-street parking. We just defined accessory dwelling unit just to go ahead and say if you're adding one, here's what it would look like. And then the off-street parking requirement now added into the table in chapter 22 for accessory dwelling units just says no parking required if it's an accessory dwelling unit. And then the definition of an accessory dwelling unit is just taken from the Senate bill. So it does kind of define form for accessory dwelling units, whether it's attached or detached. Primarily, I can move back in the slides, but it is less than 1,000 square feet or 75% of the gross floor area of the dwelling. So if you had 1,000 square foot home, then 750 square feet or less.
Okay. And can I ask a follow-up question?
Yes.
So before, when it was just a secondary dwelling unit, under the code, does that mean we don't have secondary dwelling units anymore?
Oh, no, Chair Commissioner, no, you still are able to have more than one dwelling unit on a parcel that is allowed by right. I believe that's R2 and above.
Okay, thanks.
Correction, it's all
All.
residential zoning districts are allowed to have more than one dwelling unit, and the two dwelling units in R1 and R2. R3 becomes multifamily 3+.
So if a primary dwelling unit is 5,000 square feet, they still only get 1,000 square feet for the accessory dwelling unit.
Yes, Chair and Commissioner, and that is per state statute in the language of Senate Bill 528. That's how it is defined
So do you,
and
and
codified.
not that you had any control, but why did they take away the parking requirement?
The idea was to limit all requirements for accessory dwelling units in order to allow just increased development of accessory dwelling units.
I would just observe that there are parts of Helena where parking is already enough of a problem that if you add 2 or 3 cars for an accessory dwelling unit and have a bunch of accessory dwelling units, you're gonna have a lot of parking issues, but I guess we can't do anything about that.
I have a follow-up question. Are you aware of whether there has been a lot of interest in accessory dwelling units of up to 1,000 square feet in Helena? Has the city heard a lot?
Chair Harbridge, I can't speak to whether or not the typical size of accessory dwelling units is greater than 1,000 square feet or less. I'm not sure off the top of my head.
Is there general interest in ADUs?
There is interest in ADUs, and I would not say that it has increased since this legislation has passed.
I would like to make a sharing statement as somebody who's maybe a little more in touch with people trying to develop their properties. I do personally know folks who have had issue with the parking requirement in the mansion district and have had to do things like not put in an oven and things like that, so it doesn't count fully as a separate unit, even though it is. So this is some of the sort of things that people have been doing to get around that when they have a big house and lots of parking, but they would have to cut into historic properties to meet that. So I'm personally really happy to see this. I do have a question though. I just want to make sure I understand. You do not have the 1,000 square foot limit if it's internal, correct? If it's within the same building, it's attached or detached dwelling units. But as specified earlier, internal is a third type of accessory dwelling unit. So just curious about that. So like if you have a 4,000 square foot house and a 1,200 square foot basement, are you good to go?
That is a great question, Chair and Commissioner. I believe that it would still just be for an accessory dwelling unit, 1,000 square feet or less. That could still be allowed to be a over 1,000 square feet, a second dwelling unit. However, that would require off-street parking.
I'd be curious to see how that interpretation develops given the if portion, which we are approving it that way. I think that is directly from, which sounds to me like it's qualifying the previous section stating there's 3 types. And if it is detached or attached, it may not be more than 75% or 1,000 square feet. So this something I was wondering about.
That's actually a good question. That is a weird wording there. So section B says an accessory dwelling unit may be attached, detached, or internal. Section C says if it's detached or attached, it may not be more than 7,000 square feet. So if it is internal, whatever the heck that means, it can be as big as you want. So what does that mean as a practicality? What is an internal attached accessory dwelling unit?
Thank you, Chair and Commissioner.
I could share my example and ask if I need to recuse myself. I have a very large house now, like absurd. And there is essentially a mother-in-law suite in the old ballroom. And it's like 1,400 square foot. So I would think that would be an internal dwelling unit. If I were to be able to do this, which I don't think I could. So I don't think it's relevant to this discussion because we don't have exterior access, but
Vice Chair Wilson, Commissioners, I do believe this text is drawn directly from the legislation that was passed. So I think you can blame the legislators for the confusing language. But I think that Commissioner Sorensen's interpretation is correct. There's no direct outside access from an internal unit. You would have to, it's internal to the building. So let's say you have a larger home and you separate it into apartments and all of the entrances are inside and there's like an internal staircase per se, as opposed to like you build on an apartment, an attached unit that has both internal and external access, direct external access. Does that make sense?
So how is this differentiated from an apartment and regulated?
This
How
is-
regulated different.
That would be up to a question for the legislature. They're the ones who wrote this legislation and we just have to.
Well, do we have parking requirements for apartment buildings? I assume we do.
Yes.
Say, for instance, a lot of people do Airbnb. They'll have a basement, a unit inside their basement that has a shared access to the top and the bottom. That is considered an ADU in a lot of jurisdictions. And potentially your basement could be over 1,000 square feet.
Are there any further questions for staff? Is there anyone online?
We do not have anyone online still.
Right, I will reflect for the record that there is no one present in the room either. So I will say that there's not public comment tonight. Is there any further discussion or any lingering questions? If not, I would entertain a motion.
I will move. I recommend to the city commission an ordinance establishing accessory dwelling unit zoning regulations and eliminating off-street parking requirements for accessory dwelling units by amending chapter 4 and chapter 22 of title 11 of the Helena City Code.
Second.
Is there any discussion on the motion?
Not to be a stickler, but do we need to somehow note that two of these, that what's been noticed up as 2 items is being voted on as 1?
We can very well do that. Again, the legal notice went in prior to these being combined. And it is written into the way that we also have it online. It's two separate ordinances. So you could potentially, if you choose, make a motion on each ordinance. At least that's what we have online, unless Stephen, is it now going to the city commission in one ordinance?
The city commission will only see one ordinance,
At a
combining both chapters.
So, okay.
I think what I'm suggesting is that we just we
We-
put in the
yeah.
record that what had been noticed up as two different public hearings.
Absolutely.
The amendments to the ordinances that have been noticed up in two public hearings are both being combined into one vote, with the two ordinance amendments combined into one vote.
I will make sure that gets put into the minutes for this.
Good enough?
I just want to make a comment that based on my discussion that this would be something that would affect me. I personally am disclosing it, but I don't think I feel like I need to recuse myself since it's state law. Just wanted to get that out there.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion of the motion?
Because I just want to add that I'm planning to vote for this, but I'm not really in favor of this type of legislation that's, puts the burden on city zoning commissions to amend their code to comply with a statute that says municipalities may not do X, Y, Z. And it takes a lot of the authority out of our hands to make the right decisions about where ADUs can and can't go within the city and whether parking's required, like in historic mansion districts where houses are uniquely situated, and maybe it's more appropriate for them not to require parking versus other newer subdivisions and neighborhoods where additional parking, possibly should have been required, but because it's out of our hands, I'm going to vote for it.
Any further discussion? Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the motion carries unanimously. Thank you all. Thanks, Stephen. All right, that concludes our regular items for the evening. Next up on the agenda, we have general public comment. If there is any public comment on something that is not on the agenda, there is still no one in the room.
There's no one online.
Like nobody online. We will move on. Member communications or proposals for the next agenda. There's nothing on the agenda under that.
So for the next meeting, it will be a CUP application for an emergency shelter in the downtown zoning district. And as I stated before the meeting started, but this agenda was published prior to us needing to change the next scheduled meeting date. So the next scheduled meeting is Wednesday, December 6th, which will also include a work session on the sign ordinance.
Are there materials from the emergency housing task force available online that we could review?
So there are recordings of every meeting available on the housing page of the community development webpage. There are agendas, but the city in that process has been the facilitator. We have provided a facilitator as far as technology and a room for the most part. We have been there to provide expertise for zoning, building, fire, code, all of that. And this has been facilitated by the United Way. So that's why it hasn't been there. There aren't materials out there, anything like that. It's simply an audio recording.
And so but I presume before the 6th, there'll be like a staff report.
Yes, so we received the application, and both Ellie Ray and Kyle Holland are working on this application, getting the staff report done. The legal notice just went into the paper today to run on Saturday. So we are trying to get this to you guys as quickly as possible and then to City Commission before the end of the year.
And this is to have housing in the building to the north of the steamboat block.
So yes, this is to have an emergency shelter use in what is now the Simple Cremations Memorial service area of the building that houses our place. So it is addressed on Jackson Street. And they will have a part of the CUP application that you will see all the materials for. They have draft policies and procedures for the shelter. Currently, just a bit more information. Currently, they're proposing to do this strictly women's shelter. And it's kind of a pilot program for Good Samaritan Ministries, as they are also applying for a state grant that became available this fall for shelter use. It's up to $750,000 per county. So as far as we know, they are the only ones applying for those funds from Lewis and Clark County. And it's a limited pool. Not every county will get a grant. So with that, they hope to expand the shelter use. But I think Teresa has said they anticipate providing beds for about 25 or 26 women, which would then allow God's Love to dedicate the 6 to 7 beds that they have dedicated for women currently to be used for additional men. So that's kind of the broad view of it. But there will be a staff report, everything, hopefully the week before.
Any other member communications, proposals for next agenda? Right. As noted, thanks, April. Our next meeting will be December 6th. We will have a work session preceding that meeting. If there are no other announcements this evening, we have reached the end of our agenda and we are adjourned. Thank you.